Guys, we were talking the 104 tonight. As always, let's get a little baseline by going over a trade. Are you taking Drake London or the 104? And this is a 12-team Superflex PPR start 10.
Man,
I'm taking Drake. Give me the Drake. Maybe not.
I will
I
say
don't know.
most teams I would consider taking Drake London simply based on I'm taking no risk with the pick. But I also know that I'm not even settling for a wide receiver because I'm getting a good receiver that had a great rookie year that should be a top 12 dynasty receiver. This is the type of player where if they end up getting a good quarterback, could blow up into the top 5 easily. So I could say just take that asset. But I still think on certain rosters in certain leagues, the allure of having a quarterback, and I know we'll talk about what could be there at the 104, the allure of still having that pick, it feels like I can make this move in the next month until I know what Atlanta's doing at quarterback. Like I feel it's on the table. When I know it's on the table, it's hard for me just to be like smash accept. So I think I lean the pick, but it's so close.
Because I want to take the pick because I'm like, oh, I'm definitely going to get Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. Except that I might not get Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, and I might be put in a position where I got to go, all right, well, I hope JSN turns into Drake London, or I hope Anthony Richardson can turn into a usable quarterback and not what I think he's going to be. And I don't have the cojones to be taking Anthony Richardson at 104. I can see taking the pick, but the 103 is the last pick I feel like I have any real control over of who I get. In the 104, I'm just scared that I end up with, say I trade Drake London away because I'm like, all right, I'm going to get my quarterback of the future. And my quarterback of the future has to turn into Will Levis. Like maybe everybody went quarterback, even Bijan. I don't know. Craziness ensued.
104 or Ken Walker?
Pick.
104.
Is that close at all?
It's a thought, but it's not as close as the London and pick side. I'll definitely take the pick over Walker.
It's close, but then you think back to Jahmyr Gibbs got discussed at 102 and 103. Yet Ken Walker, we're kind of leaning towards taking the pick over Ken Walker. So I think that answer, the fact that you would consider a running back in one spot, picks earlier than this, but then you would take the pick over Ken Walker. Maybe it could be just the player evaluation between Gibbs and Ken Walker and what's the ceiling and all that stuff. Or it's probably the cop-out answer is I'd consider Ken Walker if it's like the last piece of my build and he's who I want. Maybe it's a format, like Shane said, that has a small point per carry or half PPR. We get a lot of roster review questions. We get a lot of questions in general that are half PPR. Do you lean a running back over a receiver there? And I think part of the allure of the 104 is, you don't get your choice. You don't get to pick which quarterback you want, but all you really need is something to break your way for that pick to have really, really high value to where you can kind of name your price on some other assets that you might want to buy. So it's still February. It still has me leading the pick, but even closer on that one.
In a 1 QB, are you going Devontae Smith or the 104?
1 QB?
Smith.
1 QB. Yeah, give me Devonta.
That's where, when I know I'm forced to pick a receiver, probably, I'm okay taking the receiver that I know that's a top 15 receiver already. Because I know I'm going to probably be targeting a receiver in the first place at that spot. So unlike the 104 for Drake London, part of the reason there's value in the pick is there's other things that could be done with that pick versus I think in 1 QB, it's like, yeah, sure, I'm going to get the wide receiver 2.
What about Ken Walker or the 104 in a 1 QB league? Then it's Ken Walker. Easy,
yeah,
right?
I think you're leaning more towards the player in 1 QB because you don't have the outs of the quarterbacks being available. So that not just limits the quarterback options, but it limits probably the trade options, quite frankly, because the people that are offering you players are literally going receiver on the board, receiver, I'm trading you. Running back on the board, running back, I'm trading you. There isn't that dynamics, and there's not the scarcity of the quarterbacks that are going to drive not just the price of the pick, the demand of the pick. How many times do we say the picks are valuable because someone else might want a quarterback? They know the quarterback might be risky, but it's like that might be their spot to get one versus trying to trade for your one that they want. You're not moving them. So I think there's just more dynamics to a trade, which makes me lean the picks more in Superflex.
1 QB, the 104 or Ramondre Stevenson and the 204?
104.
Pick.
Yeah, this is even
not close.
Not particularly so. Look, I like Ramondre, But at the 104, I'm still going to get the wide receiver 2 of the class, wide receiver 3 of the class, running back 2 of the class, whichever one of those. I value both of those, all 3 of those, whichever math you use. I value all of those over Ramondre Stevenson, who was really excellent last year, but no, I can't do it.
So in a 1 QB, how about Travis Etienne or the 104?
I'm going Etienne.
It's not that far off from Ken Walker, right? I think they're similar. You're evaluating the player. I'm going to answer the same way I did with the other one. I'm going to take the running back as long as it fits my construction, because I'm probably looking at running back versus running back, receiver versus receiver. Now, I guess an exception would be if you had 3 running backs already and it was a deeper 1 QB league and you're like, I don't need Breece Hall, Ken Walker, and Travis Etienne on the same team. This might be my chance to turn one of those guys into a receiver. But I think Shane would even agree. If I have one of those 3, or if I have all 3 of those on one roster, am I trading it for a single pick? I'm probably going, can I trade Ken Walker for Chris Olave? You know what I mean? Can I go to another receiver versus take the pick and then take a gamble on a receiver at the same time?
All right, so we're going to be looking at some actual rosters later in the show and give our thoughts as to whether or not they should go RB, wide receiver, QB with that 104. But first off, would you please look down? Make sure you hit that little like button if you're enjoying this content. We'd appreciate that. Easiest way to help out our channel. Scott, general thoughts about the 104, man?
It's a sexy pick. I just picture eggplant emojis as soon as you say 104. Listen, it's not a pick where I'm going to get to choose the quarterback I want. Very good chance if I'm looking for the wide receiver 1 that I have to have, the choice might be taken from me. If there's a running back that I want that has really high draft capital, might be taken from me. I think the value of the 104, not to mention on the 103, if everyone goes back and watches that video, probably will be a link in the video here where you can click back and watch it. I took Anthony Richardson at the 103. I got a lot of shit in that video comments for taking Richardson so high. I think we laid out the argument as to why I did it and why Shane made a different pick and why we both agreed the pick at the 103 is great value, but it's also feels like the spot where you're going to have to make a decision if you can't trade back. So let's say you've gotten back to now the 104, or you had the 104. You either go with either of our picks, because one of them is going to be on the board at the 104. But I also think it's one of those picks where it's like you still are going to hold some leverage with this pick, because most likely the wide receiver 1, at best wide receiver 2, is going to be on the board. You're sitting pretty there. Everyone loves wide receivers. And if they love one of the top 3, you're golden. If one of those guys is available, which all of them could be, 2 of the 3 could be available, you're sitting pretty. Someone might want that player. If someone wants the QB2 or the QB3, they could be sitting here. If someone wants the RB2, they could be sitting here. So I think this pick has more value than what the market is assigning it to. It's why we talk about in a startup draft. If you're doing the startup draft like now, the 104 should be going ahead of a lot of these players that we're mentioning. If we're doing the startup draft on April 25th, you should probably go, okay, well, maybe it's either more valuable or less valuable. If you're doing the startup in July, you already know who the 104 is.
Right.
There isn't a mystery. It isn't like, okay, there could be this awesome tier of 6 players. Give me any of those 6 picks. It might be a tier of 2 players. And you go, wow, I overvalued that 104 back in the startup. But part of what you're paying for is like the potential there's a value of 5 players, 4 players. We don't know where those guys are going to go, but I think that's part of what you have to assign value for, which is why I think the 104 is still a great spot. Not only am I going to get the guy that I got at the 103, most likely, but even if I don't, there's probably enough value in the pick that can go multiple directions that in my league, people are going to go, okay, I'm legitimately looking at that 104 as I want to trade up to that 104. If it's like the 108, 107, people are end up being like, well, you know, I don't want to aggressively go up unless they have to have a significant or specific player. But I think the 104 holds a lot of power because it's going to be like the top end of the 3rd tier, maybe. And I want to be in that spot. So I love this pick. It's still a really, really valuable pick.
It does definitely feel like it's the end of a generation, end of an era, end of a tier. And just want to, just so we're not sexist, it could also be the squirt emojis. Just doesn't have to be eggplant emojis. Yeah, 104. It definitely feels like that's it, right? Because that's the last person that's going to be able to get the QB2, wide receiver 2, running back 2. Like after that, then it moves to the 3s. And if you're like Scott, you're fine with that, really, because you're like, all right, well, I'm taking Richardson here anyway. So if he falls to 105, that's fine. But you know what? Scott's not going to be alone, even though the comments would have made it seem like he is. There's going to be tons of people that want Richardson at 105 or maybe even 103. Depending on where he gets drafted. If he gets drafted to Indianapolis, is that 10th overall, 9th overall, whatever they are, there's a good chance he's the first quarterback off the board in Superflex leagues, especially if it's a PPC, because people are going to have visions of Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts combined, or just Jalen Hurts. I mean, that's his upside, right? It's a guy that can throw for 300 yards and rush for 100 yards. More likely throw for 200 yards and rush for 150, like Cam Newton in the olden days, except accurate. Once he goes to the combine, also his value is going to skyrocket, which is probably going to make the 104 skyrocket. After the NFL draft, someone's going to fall in love with Will Levis. He's going to get drafted first overall for reasons that no one can comprehend, just incorrectly. And someone in your league is going to go, I can't pass up the quarterback 1. So yeah, the 104 is going to end up being a squirty, very, very, very squirty pick.
So let's say it gets to 104. Obviously, Bijan went 101. Let's say CJ Stroud went 102, Bryce Young 103. And Scott, as much as you want to take Anthony Richardson at 104, with that particular team build, you're good on QB and you're deciding that you're not going to hoard them. Okay. So are you going to go Jahmyr Gibbs or are you going to go the wide receiver 1? We talked about how we like going wide receiver. Is that still the case, or would you even try to move back at that point? Because you're cool with the wide receiver too.
Well, when you eliminate I'm not going to take a quarterback, and I've decided that, because I think we get a lot of people that we get questions on the streams all the time where people lay out their roster and then they lay out their picks and then they'll have like parentheses of what name they already have slotted in for that pick. It'll be 102 right. Gibbs, 104 Addison, like that. They already have it predetermined. I think we articulate that that's probably not a great process to just already predetermine what position you're going to take. 1, because the draft's unpredictable. 2, in this scenario, you've already said there's 2 quarterbacks going off the board. But even so, like if you knew all of that information, which you're not going to know that information until you're actually on the clock. There's no way you're going to know it in February or March when you're actually thinking about what to do with these picks. If you made that your mission in your head, like I'm not drafting a quarterback, no matter who falls, you can already see the logic, but that's not what your question was, right? The question wasn't, well, should I be doing that? It's more of, have I already decided I'm taking a receiver? Then it gets into play, okay, what receiver can I get for the 104? Like if you've decided that, then our prior debate of Drake London or the 104, you just got answered right there. We would take Drake London. Part of the reason we didn't take Drake London was simply because it's like we have options with the pick. So I think if you do already know your tendencies and you know how your league is going to react and you know that you cannot take a 5th quarterback with that pick. We get some leagues where people are like, yeah, no one values quarterbacks. They're probably stupid not to, but they just don't. So there's going to be quarterbacks there at the 104, but you already have Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, Pat Mahomes. Like that's not a team where you're probably looking to just take the best value, especially if you have those 3 already. Like you're already stuck with probably not being able to move one of them for what you want. So do you really want to double down on the same problem? So in that case, I think you do need to be aggressive. You need to go to all of the receivers to be in the tier where you would say Drake London lands. Shoot for all of them. Eradicate the problem now. Even if you have to add a late second, mid-second to get one of the receivers. Like don't put yourself in a position where it's, I can't take a quarterback. I have to take a receiver. And now I am subject to having to take Jahmyr Gibbs or having to take Jordan. Like try to get one of those other guys. So if you made that decision in your head and you already know it, go and get rid of the pick right now would be my advice.
Well, decide nothing, first of all. You shouldn't be deciding anything before you're on the clock. But yeah, I mean, you basically need to move hell and high water just to trade. Like to the point where you take a 24 first and a 23 second, depending on the team you're taking it from. Yeah, how many people are really going to be in a position, like even in Superflex leagues, there's not many people that are really in a position that they can just completely pass up the value of a quarterback. Sometimes you do. You have Pat Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and Derek Carr somehow. So it's just redundant and ridiculous to take another quarterback there. But also, I don't want to just draft Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like we talk about drafting best player available, right? Like that's the smart play. That is the smart process. So if someone forces you to do it, I don't think we can back out now and say, you know what? Well, I don't need the quarterback. I need the wide receiver, and I'm going to draft the wide receiver, because in any other situation, we would say that's a terrible process, right?
So it seems like that might be the play. If your inclination is not to take a quarterback and you're not waiting until you're on the clock, and let's say you quote unquote need a wide receiver or need a running back, maybe that's where you throw the 104. You try to buy a vet with that 104 outright, take the decision off of your hands. So how about the 104 and 112 or Jalen Waddle
Picks.
I like Jalen Waddle, but yeah, I'll take the 104 and the 112.
You got to know your league, right? We're in some leagues where they're really active. You probably have to time this right. But if someone sends me the 104 and the 112 for my T. Higgins or my Jalen Waddle, I probably accept it. But part of the reason I would accept it is the fact that now can I buy a receiver for the 112? And then you reshape that deal to X receiver, whoever it might be, plus the 104 for T. Higgins or Jalen Waddle. And you put that in there and you go, okay, Terry McLaurin in the 104 for T. Higgins or Jalen Waddle. And you're going, man, if I can just get McLaurin's typical production, it's basically what those guys is. And I got a free 104. And part of the reason you do it is because now you have that flexibility with the 104, right? You don't send the 104 for a receiver. You've now gotten your receiver and you still have the 104. So if you think about it that way, it's like, why am I rushing to do a 1-for-1 deal? Like, that is the appropriate spot. I think everything we've talked about with the 104 shows why it's the appropriate spot to try to do one of these leverage deals where you would take multiple pieces for one piece in this range, unless you're on the clock. And that's the problem, is when we're on the clock, if nobody likes the landing spots for the first round receivers, good luck getting one of these receivers for that 104. You needed to do it when it was the mystery box. Right. So I think that's the problem with these picks, is we know it's a strong class. I can sit here and say, Clay, we're going to have 4 first-round quarterbacks. We're going to have 2 first-round running backs. We're going to have a first-round tight end. We're going to have 5 first-round receivers. And then we're going to have a bunch of running backs going in the second or third round that if people like their landing spot, they'll put those guys up in the late first because they could be starters in good spots and they have enough draft capital to warrant excitement. That's like 15 players that are warranted of like first-round dynasty picks. People don't know the names yet. They don't know where they're going to go. So they're hesitant. So that's kind of how this class feels like. And this 104 is the spot where it starts to feel like you want the pick simply because you know the profiles you're going to get, but you could get burned. If you don't move the picks and you go, I'm just going to draft every rookie, there might be spots in the draft where Clay's in a league with me, Shane's in a league with me. Like, I'm good. I have a 104 in another league. You can take it here. You can make the tough decision. I'll draft my 107, my 108, 109, and I'll be fine.
Let's do this. Let's look at this roster right here, this Superflex roster, and give some tips as to where he or she should go with this 104. All right, so looking at this roster right off the bat, we tend to look at quarterbacks first, right, in a Superflex. He or she's good with Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes. Running back, we have Rachaad White. We have a bunch of trash cans, as Shane would say. We do have the 104, so maybe we would address it with that. We've got Deontay Johnson, Gabe Davis, Christian Watson, Evan Ingram, DJ Moore, Juju, Jacoby Myers to round out the starting lineup. So what are your thoughts here, guys? We got some options with the 104 here.
Yeah, we do. And then, just this is a good point to bring up too. That he's got other picks, right? He's got the 107, and I think he's got or she's got a 207 too. Looking at this roster, right? What I want to do is attach that 104 to Juju Smith-Schuster and go get a real wide receiver. That's my thought process.
Try to get Garrett Wilson, 104 and Juju for Garrett Wilson, or a lot of.
Yeah, I would definitely do that. Or first, I wouldn't even try Juju. I'd just try the 104 and then sweeten the pot. I'd be like, here's Juju. He's had a great Super Bowl. He's a really good wide receiver. This is that exact situation we're talking about. He's got Deshaun Watson and Pat Mahomes, right? But if forced, well, then why wouldn't I just take CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson here? Obviously, he needs a running back. She needs a running back. Looking at the roster, Rachaad White is the best running back on the team. And then it's just just a 0 RB nightmare. But, they could hit next year. But I don't want to be forced just to grab a running back or a wide receiver here because I need it. I'm looking to trade out.
There's no QB3. There's no QB3 here, Scott. What are your thoughts on what to do with the 104 at quick glance?
So I see this team a little differently than Shane, which isn't a shocker, but it's a start 11, right? 8 taxi spots, 12 bench spots. Got the quarterbacks locked down. Perfect. Love it. I'm counting the receivers. How many receivers do I go into next year in a start 11 that I count as startable or high-end flex range? So he's got Deontay Johnson, Gabe Davis, Christian Watson, DJ Moore, Juju, Jacoby Myers. That's 6 right there. Nothing on the bench significant at receiver. I'm fine with the receiver trade at 104. I'm fine with a trade down if it gets me a third quarterback. Can it get me a Jimmy Garoppolo and move down 3 spots? Something like that. Like, get creative. I know he has the 107, so it's not going to be 3 spots, but you get the picture. Can I get a quarterback that gives me insurance for a move back? So then let's say I make that deal. Let's say I have to give up the 104 and I get back Geno Smith in the 109. Okay, something like that. Someone really wants a player at 104 and they're willing to give me a 2-for-1. Ryan Tannehill in the 108. I'd consider a deal like that because it's roster construction. Now, the person's not going to like what their lineup looks like here. But now you have the 107, you have the 108, you also have the 207, the 307, 311, 404, 407, 507, an extra second next year. Here's how I'm playing this. Shane's going to hate this. I'm rolling in with Rashad White. I'm rolling in with Antonio Gibson. I'm cutting the dead weight or guys that I don't want. So probably Jarrett Patterson. He sucks. Rob Gronkowski. He's terrible. A few others you can dump. Kendall Hinton. But listen, you know what my bench is going to be? 1 quarterback. Give me 1 more receiver. Give me a platoon tight end with Evan Ingram. And I'm carrying 17 running backs. I'll win that way.
Yeah, I love Scott. I hate the Jimmy Garoppolo 108, Geno Smith 108.
I don't want. I can get by if I have. Here's the difference. If I can roster 20 running backs, I will be fine at running back. Now, and the point is, there isn't a great time for me to trade for a hammer right now. I'm not using the 104 to get a running back. I don't even really want to use the 107 or 108. If I can get a clear win deal, sure. I'm not giving up like a 107 for a Derrick Henry or something like that. You know what?
How about a 104 for Jonathan Taylor?
If you can, sure. But the point is, it's roster construction, right? Like, I can win. The biggest takeaway for me when looking at this roster, I can win because I have so many roster spots. But I am slimming down everywhere else. The only other thing you could maybe do was, could you get Travis Kelce on this team? Kick Evan Ingram to your backup. And now I have the tight end advantage with Watson, with Mahomes, with enough receivers that can get me by. This is how I played the first trades in 5 listener league. Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, George Kittle, and my running backs were just subject to coin flips that I hit on in a startup. I hit on Ramondre, but that's it. That's it. You don't need running backs to win, especially when you have a whole off season. Let me just say this. Yeah. When you have a whole off season, we get to July, August, September, October, November. What are people going to be doing? Tossing out Aaron Joneses for a second, Derrick Henry for a second. The guys you want that are smashing during the season are going to go for a lot. There's going to be gambles, though, where you can buy good running backs for cheap if you keep pushing the age on these guys. So I'm just betting on that. I'm not paying a 104 for a decent running back right now. I'm just not doing it.
The one thing about this is how many teams are really going to have Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes, right? Like, there's 12 teams in your league. So I'm not great with math, but it would be physiologically impossible for all 12 teams to be built like this, right? To have
I'm sorry. Say that word again.
Physiologically. Yeah.
Did I catch a niner in there?
That's it. Definitely a word.
Yeah, looking at this, like, part of me would want to go try to move up from the 107. So take the 207 and the 107 and try to get up to 105, just to kind of have a little leverage spot right there at 104 and 105 to where I could take a QB if I needed to, but then also be able to address another position.
If I'm moving the 107 and adding any assets to it, I'm not taking a shot on a draft pick. So we feel like we're very good at drafting, but we're not. That's not just an us thing. That's just in general. That's an NFL. That's a dynasty community thing. going to whiff on a lot of our trades.
I think the lesson from this is there isn't one way to play it because this team has good roster construction already and it has some picks to play with. So there's a lot of ways you could say, okay, I'm building it. I think the point of this exercise, look at your team, look at their roster construction. This team's like 95% of the way constructed really well. Like you can tell they've put in planning. You don't just, I will just say this, you do not just stumble across the team that has 18 of their 20 bench spots are running backs. They're getting that from somewhere, right? How many teams do we look at throughout your leagues and you go trash receiver, trash receiver, trash receiver, 5 tight ends and a non-tight end premium? Like we see that constantly. So this person's already thinking about, okay, even if a lot of his running backs, like Shane said, that are on his roster right now are dog shit, they're already kind of getting the form correctly. So it's really about continuing to play that however you want to go. If you want to go buy an anchor running back for the 104, fine. I could be with Clay too. If you told me, hey, I'm going to really take a gamble and I'm just going to take Anthony Richardson at 104. He's my third QB. If he hits, I have an embarrassment of riches. If he doesn't, and he's kind of like just stagnant in value. Part of the reason I like Richardson is because if he doesn't play, guess what? He just sits there.
Yeah, he's
not going to actually go
value
down.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like you still have a trade chip if you draft him. But I think the point is this team already has a plan. So since the plan is 95% of the way complete, where I differ probably from Shane is I'm just going to stay with the plan.
Let's do this. Let's move over to a 1 QB roster and see what they should do at 104. It's a 12-team 1 QB half PPR start 8. He's got the 104, the 109, and 203. Let's look at the QB. We got Trey Lance, RBs, Breece Hall, J.K. Dobbins, wide receivers, Jamar Chase, Marquise Brown, Darren Waller at tight end, Garrett Wilson, DJ Moore in the flex, and then kicker and defense because they exist apparently. Looking at the bench, a couple names that stick out: Drake London, Christian Watson, George Pickens. Scott, what are we doing with the 104 in this one?
As you can see, it's a shallow league. Kickers and defenses do not count, so it's a start 8. So it's the dynamics is totally different than a Superflex start 11, right? Like the dynamics and the math is totally different in this. The 104, the 109, I mean, you're talking Drake London, George Pickens, Christian Watson coming off the bench. Obviously, the running backs are weak. In a lot of leagues, we would be like, oh, that's no big deal if my running backs are weak. Just give me assets, right? But this is the perfect league where as soon as we see start 8 and we see those receivers, there's 2 things that come to mind for me. It's basically, am I fine with my tight end room? Am I good with my quarterback room? If the answers to both of those are yes, or I don't want to go pay for that right now or whatever, like address those at a different time. But this is the team where it's ready for Bijan and you hope that the team with the 101 is willing to trade. And I think you're at the point where it's 104, 109. Let me see. Can I also interest you in maybe another piece in there? How about a second? Can I interest you in J.K. Dobbins maybe? Can I, it's like, it's basically what is it going to take to get your 101? Start low, but also be willing to pay like 3 first value or more in a league like this because it's a start 8. And he needs a running back. Like he even says, the running backs are hard to get because it's half PPR. It's like, how do I get one of the... And if you can't get Bijan because the person's attached to Bijan, go for Jonathan Taylor. This is the league to pay 2 first for Kenneth Walker, for Travis Etienne, for Saquon Barkley. Like, go for all of those. I'm looking at that way more in this type of format.
104, 109, 203. See ya. Can I get the 101? That's what I want. But like you said, Jonathan Taylor. All right, I'll give you the 104 and the 109. Give me Jonathan Taylor. I'll give you 104, 109. I'm cheap. I'm going to start with the 104 and the 203 and see what that gets me. I don't expect to get it done. It is the point. I have no problem giving up all 3 of those picks for a running back in a start 8, whether it's Bijan, whether it's Jonathan Taylor, whether it's Ken Walker. Start 8. This is hammers. Like the depth does not matter. It will never matter. Jamar Chase be getting moved in a half-point PPR. But that's a story for another day. Well, you know what? No, it's a story for this day. Would you trade Jamar Chase for the 101? Bijan, start 8. You want
start 8 half PPR?
Half PPR.
If there was a deal where you would say this will be the format to do it, it would be this one because I'm guessing running backs are even harder to get. The format leans basically equal to running backs versus receivers, and sounds like his league is way going to overvalue the running backs versus the receivers. So if you did, I don't think I'm going to say that's wrong. I'm good with it.
So we talked about Bijan there a little bit. So let's trade up to go get him. So would you rather have the 104 and the 106 or the 101? Let's say it's a 12-team Superflex start 10.
101.
What about the 104, 107, and 110 for the 101? Not get it done?
The 104, 17, and 110 start 12.
12 teams start 10.
Well, either way, that would get it done if my team is bereft of assets. If I have one of those teams that's not ready for Bijan, yeah, that'd be a pretty good deal for me to make right there. And then I'd flip that 110 for a 24 first if I could.
The 4 and the 6 is the 101 by a little bit, but I think that when you're adding in the extra pick or the extra first, that's not the 112, it's the 110. So you actually have a better chance to maybe move that up a spot or two or trade it out. I think you just got to take that's one of those where you're either in on Bijan or your team isn't ready for him. And if you've decided, if I have any reservations whether I'm ready, take the 3 first.
Josh Jacobs and the 104 or the 101?
Yeah, it's probably not that different from the 104 and the 106.
Yeah.
But again, I want the listeners to think about your construction there, especially if you for some reason that's perfect for one of those teams that needs a quarterback and is desperate for one of those trade backs. You might be able to get a couple extra seconds, especially get into deeper leagues. If the person's willing to put Josh Jacobs and the 104 in your inbox, and it's not like a start 8 or a start 9, it's a start 10 or more, ask for a couple extra seconds, right? Try the first for a second swap next year. Throw that in there. If they decline, you kind of already know. They've showed their hand. You know what I mean? So I think you push, because that might actually fit your construction pretty well.
So if you wanted to trade back, would you give the 104 for the 109 and 112?
Still talking Superflex here?
Yep.
It's tempting, especially if you're in that position where you don't need the quarterback. If you've already committed, you don't care about getting one or not. Could be tempting, especially if you can move one of those for a 24 first. All of a sudden, you've gotten the 24 first and another first that you can still take a shot on a running back, especially. I'd be tempted.
Shane, how about you? Superflex, would you rather have the 104 or the 109 and 112?
I want the 104. I know it's Superflex. The tier down is the 112 is. I know it still has the 1 in front of it, right? It's not that valuable to me. It's not doing it for me. It's not doing it. It's still got to have a 0 in front of it. It's different if you were like 108 and 109. Then I could be like, yeah, I can do it because it's got that 0 in front of it.
Any trade down, you have to know your league. Is this the best I can do? There's some leagues where people don't trade up.
No.
There's other leagues where people will trade up like crazy to get a player that you don't even know is going to be as valuable as what's going to be on the board. So it's even if you think you're getting a good deal, are you getting a great deal? And why am I giving away my time advantage that, unfortunately, if I trade this pick away to Clay and he has the 104 now, Clay now holds that extra advantage of holding that 104 over everybody's head for the next 3 months. Yep. So think about that. Don't put the names into the player spots yet until you're absolutely certain, which you're not going to be for at least 4 more months. So just think about that.
You don't have to take every trade that's offered to you. You don't have to trade down. Not all the time, but sometimes it's a good idea just to take the pick. Just do it. If someone offers you the 110 and the 204, and you're like, well, that's the best I can get. I guess I got to move them. Like that. That's never felt right to me. Doing those types of trades, like it's never felt like a winner. It's never worked out long term the way that you hoped it